On the eve of the expiration of Trump's ultimatum, Putin gave a tough order to the states.
We do not threaten anyone, but we are a nuclear power. Our arsenals allow for effective nuclear deterrence.
In response, Trump's associates smeared Putin live on air.
I think it is impossible to get into Putin's head, because it is sick, perverted and, most likely, devoid of logic.
Meanwhile, the US State Department sent a strong signal to Moscow.
We will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, which is calling for a comprehensive ceasefire, one that will stop any attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure.
We're discussing this further, but first like and subscribe to the channel. It's always interesting here. Let's go.
President Putin commented on the statement of the American president for the first time. Earlier, Trump said that he was disappointed.
As for any disappointments on the part of anyone, all disappointments arise from excessive expectations. The first thing I want to say in this regard: we have produced the first serial complex Oreshnik, the first serial missile, and it was placed at the disposal of the army. Now the series has worked. This is the first thing. And the second: our specialists, both Belarusian military specialists and Russian ones, have chosen a place for future positions. And now the work is underway to prepare these positions.
Moscow continues to escalate the situation with the United States. And he publicly declares that Washington, they say, needs to keep quiet about the Russian-Ukrainian war. That is to abandon their plans to support Ukraine with weapons and internationally. If someone missed this, last week, Lukashenko visited Putin for a couple of days. And these two grandfathers then held an impromptu press conference on a bench. Two grandfathers in the Valam bushes started threatening President Trump. They claimed the American leader should fear Moscow, as Oreshnik is in mass production, and they disregard Trump's overseas ultimatums. The states, of course, all reacted to this, but I will talk about this in more detail in a couple of minutes. As you can guess, after this artisanal press conference, the dancing epic did not end. After all, there were a lot of threats to America from Moscow this weekend. Since, as zPublic's write, Putin personally ordered his slaves to directly threaten the states with nuclear weapons, and at the same time, demand that Washington respect Moscow. The Kremlin is now saying that it is much more profitable for the United States to deal with Russia as a partner than as an adversary. And what's funny is that the Patriots, as usual, started by waving the nuclear club. And they ended up saying that some of the goals of the special operation would be achieved. But how to find a place for cooperation, partnership, and respect between these passages remained unclear.
We know how the US president reacts nervously to certain circumstances. He is very fond of pomposity. Look, the signing of the next, in fact, decision on sanctions in the White House, how people crowded around it, the closest team applauds. It reminds me of the unforgettable Leonid Ilyich, of course, Brezhnev, who signed fateful documents with 4 stars, and the members of the Politburo greeted him. In fact, these are American political traditions today. We respect this. We are not ironic, but at the same time we call on the US administration and the esteemed 47th President of the United States to be realistic. The most important message: Russia as a partner for the United States is much more profitable than a direct military political opponent. We do not threaten anyone, but we are a nuclear power. Our arsenals allow for effective nuclear deterrence. And in this regard, of course, the United States should respect the position of the Russian Federation. At the same time, we do not demonstrate hostility towards the United States. But at the same time, let's not fawn or fidget. The special military operation will continue, despite any promises, threats, messages, because this is a strategic mission that Russia is solving today, to secure a future world order and its proper place.
The states heard this, but there's a nuance. Trump doesn't give a damn about what these pensioners said in the Kremlin, because he understands that Moscow is stupidly trying to take the great Donny to show off. On the contrary, the US president, seeing that Putin is demonstrating intractability and inadequacy, has finally begun to act. Not just talk, but act, and it seems that it is really bringing peace through force. At first, the US president said that US nuclear submarines were already near Russian territory. Trump did this after previously announcing it in response to growing threats from the Kremlin.
Regarding Moscow, Mr. President, can you tell us whether nuclear submarines have already been deployed to deter Russia?
I've already made a statement. They are in the right region. No clarifications needed.
This was a real example of a point in the plan for peace through force. Don't want to end the war? Are you threatening us with nukes? Okay, we won't threaten you. A few of our nuclear-armed submarines will swim very close to you. They will stand. So that you realize who you are trying to dig against and what it can lead to. The Kremlin's reaction to Trump's decision was amused. Today Putin released Peskov. And then he said so hesitantly, in fact, that Putin swallowed the fact of the presence of US submarines. Peskov said the following, paraphrasing in his own words. We hope that this is just combat duty. Let them swim. We anticipated Trump would abandon Ukraine and Europe to us. But he drove his nuclear weapon closer to Russia, now he threatens us. So we're afraid to even talk about it. Forgive us, great Trump.
On Friday, President Trump ordered 2 nuclear-powered submarines closer to Russia. He explained this step with provocative statements by Dmitry Medvedev. How does the Kremlin perceive this statement by Trump?
In this case, it is obvious that American submarines are already on combat duty. This is an ongoing process. This is the first thing. But in general, of course, I would not like to be drawn into such polemics in any way. And I would not like to comment on this in any way. We are very careful about any statements related to the nuclear issue. You know that Russia is a responsible position. President Putin's position is well known. Russia is very attentive to the topic of nuclear non-proliferation. And of course, we believe that everyone should be very, very careful with nuclear rhetoric.
In short, you get the idea. They swallowed. This highlights Putin's weakness and inability to respond to Trump's nuclear gesture. Let's put it this way. The nuke state in Russia is largely a mystery, even for the Kremlin. US nuclear capabilities are widely known to be much more powerful than Russia's. And many times more modern. And seriously, that's what to say about the nuclear weapon, about its condition and strength, if Putin with his Kent Lukashenko literally complained at that makeshift press conference that Ukraine was shelling Russian military facilities with its drones. Like, how is this possible? Grandfathers begged Zelensky to stop Russia's demilitarization. Because Putin clearly did not calculate the fact that in the 4th year of the demilitarization of Ukraine, Kiev will regularly smash Putin's arsenals deep behind Russia's lines.
I recently met, I said it to President, with the Americans. I told them this openly. These are his close friends. You tell the president to do all this carefully. And you can come to an agreement. A truce. I say, and Russia is interested in this, and President Putin. But you don't want that. Tell Zelensky, let him go for it, so that there are no flying machines and they do not fall on people's heads.
And note that it was Lukashenko who said this heartfelt speech about the air truce. Putin just sat silently next to him and nodded his head like a dog on a torpedo. It was all for a reason, too. The Moscow president shifted the responsibility to grandfather Sasha. Because he himself wanted to look strong in the eyes of the whole world and, first of all, Trump. Putin spoke about Oreshnik at the press. About the fact that the Russian army is advancing at the front. Putin still raised an eyebrow about Chasiv Yar. He claimed Europe lost sovereignty and threatened Trump. Lukashenko sat beside him, discussing topics like the air truce that were awkward for the St. Petersburg grandfather. I don't know what he agrees to. Kiev experienced 4 air raid alerts today. But the very fact of such a statement tells us that Moscow is powerless in the face of attacks by Ukrainian UAVs. Which, of course, cannot but rejoice. And now back to Trump. Regarding nuclear weapons and drones. It is not surprising that the US president did not fall for Moscow's threats. After all, he, realizing that this was a bluff, on the contrary, began to act. Trump stated that in addition to necessary nuclear weapons, there would be secondary sanctions, and that nothing would stop him, unless Putin suddenly does not want to end his war against Ukraine.
Mr. President, what's your message to the Russians? Can they avoid sanctions?
Let them make a deal to prevent deaths. New data shows a large number of Russian soldiers are dying. And Ukrainians are also dying. Though fewer, it's still thousands of people, plus cities hit by Russian missiles. This is a terrible war. We've stopped a lot of wars. Between India and Pakistan, for example. We will stop this terrible war by any means. As for the sanctions, yes, they will be. The Russians skillfully bypass them. They are dodgy, and we'll see the impact.
And the US president says for a reason that secondary sanctions may not work. This indicates that the White House has begun to understand the level of Putin's inadequacy. Which, by the way, was recently confirmed by US Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker. He said that Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, will have to fly to Moscow this week. Which, in fact, must convey to Putin a clear ultimatum from Trump. And if the Kremlin's response is no, and it will not, then Washington will further strengthen armed support for Ukraine so that Kiev can more effectively defend itself against Russian attacks. Whitaker stated that Washington is preparing for a scenario with tariffs against Kremlin partners, sanctions on Russia, and ongoing conflict by Putin.
I think it is impossible to get into Putin's head, because it is sick, perverted, and, most likely, devoid of logic. He likely wouldn't want to conflict with the world's most powerful army, the USA.
What do you think Witkoff can achieve in negotiations with Putin, if he can achieve anything at all?
I know Steve, he's certainly a talented diplomat. He is going there soon to give Putin an ultimatum to immediately cease fire. The time has come to end the murder. Of course, we expect that these important, high-tech, first-class types of weapons, which we sell to our European allies and which will be used on the front line by Ukraine, will become a turning point. And ultimately, the main thing is to stop the bloodshed. This is the most important thing.
Whitaker continued, quoting, "A couple of weeks ago, Trump asked me to coordinate the transfer of weapons to Ukraine by selling them to European allies. We will complete some big things in the coming weeks. I have just been to Poland, working on it. The guys there are moving these things to and from the front. We expect that these important advanced weapons will soon be used at the front and will make an excellent result there. We await new unannounced arms deliveries." So you look at all this and understand, no matter how much Putin threatens Trump, no matter how much his puppets talk about the fact that the states will be destroyed, that victory will be theirs.
For them, we were and remain Untermensch, whose lives do not have to be cared about. But the truth is that no one needs us in the West. They need justification for their aggression, for their misanthropic philosophy, which they reproduce over and over again. Therefore, the West will pump up to the limit. Therefore, when I look at all sorts of Rubio, at Trump's statements, when they say that patience is running out and that it will be necessary to use force, this patience of ours is running out. We can use a force unknown to America or Europe. It is we who are at war with Ukraine as a fraternal people, de facto still not conducting full-scale military operations, in many ways limiting ourselves in means of destruction, at least those that we have, much more powerful. They must know, we won't mess with them. The blow will be in accordance with our doctrine, and the blow will be annihilating.
The White House, fortunately, is now directly and clearly telling Putin that it will not back down and that armed support for Ukraine is a priority for them. Since it was Kiev that showed that it wanted to end the Russian-Ukrainian war, it never wanted this war at all. It is Kiev that insists on a comprehensive truce. And Moscow, on the contrary, is doing everything to ensure that this war continues. No one believes Lukashenko and Putin's fairy tales about an air truce readiness, especially given the dynamics of Russia's terrorist strikes on Ukraine in recent days. In this regard, the US State Department sent a decisive signal to Moscow to dot all the dots, so to speak, and so that there are no manipulations.
To be clear, this administration is not seeking a quick solution, but a lasting, sustainable peace in the region. We want to continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, which is calling for a comprehensive ceasefire, one that will stop any attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure. The US knows, and the President insists, that direct negotiations like in Istanbul are needed to achieve this goal. We must continue to work for a comprehensive, unconditional ceasefire that will lead to a peace agreement. The US Secretary of State has repeatedly stated what this means. Both sides must make feasible decisions to achieve peace, security, and prosperity for their citizens. The US firmly supports a just peace and will not abandon it now.
So the situation for today is as follows, friends. In any case, we will see how the situation will develop further. Thank you today for watching and see you next time.